All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We may have some stragglers joining us, and that's a-okay. Thank you for attending our event today, Open Minds, an honest conversation about mental health in the advertising industry. A really important topic that we definitely want to have some open discussion about today. I'm Michelle Benson. I am the current president of AdFed Minnesota. In case you don't really know who we are, AdFed is a nonprofit professional trade association that serves the Minnesota advertising community. We're committed to bringing quality content, events, and opportunities to a variety of local marketers, and our board is made up of complete volunteers. Just a side note, if you are interested in getting involved, we are currently accepting applications for the new board year for both AdFed and the Ad2 board. For more information, the deadline to submit is Monday, and for more information, go to adfed.org to click through to a link that gives you more information. So to start the night off, I want to indicate that we have a hashtag that we would like you to join the conversation online if you so choose. Using any of the social media platforms, please feel free to use the hashtag OpenMinds and have some open dialogue there as well. To really kick us off then, I'd like to introduce Mike Coggin from Mcvoy and board member at the Brand Lab. Mike, take it away.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Sorry if you heard a little car horn in the background. My apologies. Mike Coggin, Chief Creative Officer of Mcvoy and Board Chair of the Brand Lab. It's an honor to be speaking with all of you. Thank you for joining in. And looking forward to hopefully having more conversations around this. Mental health, creating awareness, and reducing the stigma of living with a mental illness became a personal journey for my daughter and for me to a lesser extent. And I won't get into it. We can share it over beers later, but long story short, we're both doing well. And but more importantly, what's happened from all of this has been an inspiration. We started talking about mental health, and at our agency, we've had several conversations, even living in a virtual world, and it led us to this day where we decided the community really needed this, and we needed to talk about this. And so huge thanks to the AdFed for hosting this event, for organizing this event, and thanks to all of you for joining and also for donating. As of today, 4 p.m. today rather, we had 219 people register for the conversation and have raised a few $100s for the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation and for NAMI. So thank you to all of you who have donated. I also want to take a moment to share a tribute to our colleague, late colleague and friend, Doug Adkins. So as many of you are aware, Doug Adkins of Hunt Adkins passed away unexpectedly last week. Doug was recognized as one of the great writers in modern advertising history and a creative pillar of our Minneapolis ad community. For the last 27 years, and to everyone at Hunt Adkins, he was also our Chief Creative Officer, partner, coworker, and friends. Sadly, we lost Doug to mental illness. Coworkers are important, as are dads, moms, brothers, sisters, extended family, friends, and well, everyone. All of us at Hunt Adkins ask you to be there for friends fighting mental illness and look out for those who may be struggling in silence. To learn more, take action, or donate, please visit National Alliance on Mental Illness or NAMI.org. Speaking personally, one of the reasons I moved to the Twin Cities over 21 years ago was in large part to the incredible work that Hunt Adkins was doing. I was seeing it from afar from the East Coast, and everyone at the time was fawning over the bigger shops like Fallon and Carmichael and others. But the creatives at those very shops were jealous of the work being done at Little Hunt Adkins. Everyone wanted to infuse more risk, more creativity, more unexpectedness, more humor and more craft into their work because of Hunt Adkins, because of Doug, and his brilliance. And that's remained true to today. My copywriter coworkers still reference his recent work and his past work. And I just wanted to say on behalf of Call Mcvoy and all the creatives out there, thank you, Doug, for all that you've done for our creative community and the community at large. You'll always be revered and deeply missed. With that said, I'd love to spend a minute in a moment of silence in memory of Doug. Thank you. All right. Well, I think we should get on to our conversation. I'd love to turn it over to Bryan Piatt. He's multimedia producer at Care 11 and co-founder of the Refresh Network. Over the past few years, Bryan's been leading by example in the Twin Cities, very openly sharing his personal stories and struggles with mental illness in an ongoing effort to help thousands of others. Thank you, Bryan, and today's panelists for being part of this discussion.
Mike, I want to thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and just want to thank everybody with AdFed, with this entire discussion for asking me to be part of this. I'm truly honored, and this has been a subject, mental health, that is very near and dear to my heart. It is something that I have been talking much more publicly about over the last year or so. I want to give you just a little bit of context, I guess, for anybody that isn't familiar with my story. Just kind of share with you, I guess, what's led me up until this point, up to this point, and really why I feel so passionately about showing up in spaces just like this to facilitate conversations about something that I just don't think is talked about enough. I think is really, really important to talk about. So as Mike mentioned, I work over at Care 11, which if you're not in the Twin Cities, that's the NBC station here in the Twin Cities. I am currently a producer there for the morning show. I put stories together for the morning show. I, in the past, have been much more in front of the camera as an anchor, as a reporter, and recently made a decision about a year and a half ago to really shift up my job title there at Care 11, based in large part due to my mental health. It was really a decision that I made to put my mental health at the forefront, and I've been really blessed to be able to use my platform in the community to have conversations about mental health. I'm somebody that lives every day of my life with anxiety. I've also been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and have been talking very openly about that. I think a lot of people that struggle with their mental health, I think, can probably attest to this to some extent. I can look back in my childhood and see a lot of different traces of anxiety and a lot of anxious tendencies. And one thing that I always like to share is that I was in the cafeteria in 6th grade, and I had what I now understand to be a panic attack. I had this huge kind of wave of feeling like really detached from my body, feeling like really spacey, feeling really just absolutely terrified of all this like anxiety that I was experiencing inside. And I at the time had like no context of what exactly that feeling was. I was really scared. I thought there was something terribly wrong with me. I thought I had a brain tumor. I thought, there must be something really awful wrong with me. I had no idea in that moment in 6th grade that what I was experiencing was anxiety, and that there are a lot of different tools out there for how to maneuver this. And I go back to that 6th grade version of myself very often when I'm talking about these things, simply because I think through conversations like this that we're having here today, through whenever we step out there and we talk about mental health, we reach people hopefully to let them know that whenever they're experiencing whatever it is, right? Anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, no matter what it is, no matter what somebody's particular struggle is, we need to reach them at a point and let them know that they're not alone, let them know that there's nothing wrong with them, let them know that there's a beautiful support and a beautiful community out there that's ready to help hold their hand as they walk through all the struggles that can come with mental health. So I struggled really deeply for a long time. I didn't talk about it. I really internalized it. And you know, fast forward, I was able to, you know, quote unquote, thrive in my career, right? From the outside looking in, looked like I kind of had it all together. I was an anchor in a top 15 market, and all the flashiness that kind of comes with that. And I eventually started struggling with really bad panic attacks, actually on live television. Got to a point where even just doing my job day in and day out became really, really tough for me. And so, kind of like Mike said, I won't go into all the details. Maybe that is best for something over a beer someday. But bottom line is, day in and day out for me, my approach to my mental health is this mantra for me of allowing and showing up. So doing the best for me, not to fight anxiety when it comes up, not to try to figure out my anxiety, not try to sit around and wait for it all to go away, but really learning how to kind of invite it along for the ride a little bit more, and doing my best to show up day in and day out for my life, whatever that looks like. That might look like showing up here on this webinar today and talking with all of you. That might look like going on a date. That might look like you know, leaning into friendships and connections in my life, and recognizing that that I'm a lot more resilient than my mind likes to tell me I am. I think that's what I hope really comes through in this conversation here today, is that I don't think us as human beings really give ourselves credit for the resilience that we all possess, especially when we're struggling with things like mental health. It can feel really overwhelming, but the courage to step into your life every day with kind of a silent struggle going on and an internal struggle going on, I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for that. And I also recognize that we all want to live lives professionally that are fulfilling, and that we can kind of go out and live our purpose. And I know you guys are all doing such incredible things in the advertising world. And I think we're all asking ourselves questions right now, and I know a lot of us are, of how do we do that? How do we still achieve all those things that we want to achieve, and also nurture ourselves from a mental health standpoint? And I think too many of us feel like we're the only ones struggling, and that you know, everybody else appears to have it all pulled together, but why can't I get it all pulled together? And I can tell you that from the number of people that I've talked to since I've really started opening up, a lot of us struggling out there, and we might as well just talk about it. And then there's beautiful tools, and there's beautiful ways to live a very fulfilling, very meaningful, very full, rich life, no matter what you have going on inside. So that being said, I should mention the Refresh Network is, I still work at Care 11. I also have a platform called the Refresh Network, which is really aimed at having open, real, safe conversations about mental health, and that's taken on a number of different forms, whether it's public speaking, doing interviews on YouTube and things like that. But that's something, if you're interested in learning more about that work, I encourage you to check that out if that's something that resonates with you. But I want to dive into the real reason that we're all here, and that is the beautiful panel that has been assembled, everybody with so many different perspectives on this. And what I'm going to do is mention each person's name here. I'll kind of go one by one. I'm going to tell you who they are. I'm going to tell you their title, and then I'll let each of them say a little word, just kind of introduce themselves so you can hear from them. We'll go through the introductions, and then we'll dive into the conversation. And I want to start with Miles Marmo. Miles is a managing partner with agency Squid. So Miles, why don't I turn it over to you? to you here for a moment.
Great. Thanks, Bryan. Miles Marmo, as Bryan said, co-founder and managing partner of agency Squid, and also the current AdFed vice president. I happen to be one of those people that leads an agency and also manages mental health daily. So excited to be a part of this conversation, and yeah, hopefully it at the very least provides some guidance and perspective of, you know, how some of this panel and manage things. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Miles. We look forward to talking to you more. Let's send it over now to Michael Hart. Michael is the founder and chief creative director with Mono. How you doing over there, Michael?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for including me in this really important and vital conversation. There must have been something that happened a year ago or so, because like you, Bryan, and you, Mike, we started talking about mental health in our organization and started to share some personal stories and journeys too. That was really kind of a starting point for us to really embrace the things that we believe in. So looking forward to this conversation. This is important and feels very vital. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Michael. Let's turn it over now to Sue Abderholden. Sue doing such beautiful, important work. I've had the honor of working with Sue in the past. It's good to see you. Sue is the executive director with the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Minnesota. Hello there, Sue.
Hey, Bryan, good to see you. So NAMI's mission is really kind of focuses on championing justice, dignity, and respect. And we do that by providing education, support, and advocacy. We are not mental health providers. I'm not a mental health professional. Nearly everyone involved with NAMI either lives with a mental illness or has family members. And I have several family members who live with depression and anxiety. And I'm really pleased to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Sue. Let's turn it over now to Adriana Velez. She is the social media coordinator with Hubbard Interactive. Hello.
Hi, thanks, Bryan. So I kind of live in the social media space day in and day out, 24/7. I opened up about my journey with mental health a couple years ago. I've struggled with depression and anxiety since I was a child and developed a really bad eating disorder during college. So I kind of opened up on social media, and I wanted to be the voice that I needed when I was at my lowest points. Kind of started sharing, and my goal was really to impact at least one person's life and make them feel okay with what they were feeling. And I think I've accomplished that. Yeah.
Beautiful. So important to be opening up and sharing, Adriana. We're so glad that you're here. And last but certainly not least, let's check in with Dustin Brockberg. Dustin is a mental health practitioner with Hazelden Betty Ford. Hello, Dustin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Dustin Brockberg. I'm one of the mental health practitioners here at Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation up in Center City, Minnesota. Very happy to be here. It's really awesome to see everyone just kind of embracing and not being silent about mental health and figuring out ways to work through this during a very difficult time. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I want to mention here before we dive in that you can ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. You can do that through the Q&A function that's on the bottom there of the screen here in Zoom. So you can drop a question in there. You can be anonymous in that. I believe that there is an option to anonymously submit a question. I'm going to keep an eye on those questions, and we'll do our best to get as many of those as we possibly can. I want to start off here actually with Dr. Brockberg. I just want to, I think, acknowledge right now just the intensely emotional and difficult time that we're all living in at the moment. And Dustin, I would imagine, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine there's a lot of questions going on right now of how to maneuver everything that we're experiencing from a mental health standpoint. Is there anything that you would want to share with people just about how to do that, I guess? I mean, I know that there's no simple answer to it, but I just feel like I want to acknowledge that here right at the start.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, important question. I mean, I think, it's been pretty compounded, not only with what's going on in national news right now, but what we've been going through in regards to COVID. And that
obviously takes a toll on people. And, one of the things that we know is naturally we can respond well to stress initially. And we also can develop almost like a resilience to stress and to anxiety for a moment. But over the course of time and just chronic stress, it can kind of really not break us, but really bring us to a point where we're exhausted. And a lot of people at this point have been really experiencing that exhaustion, and that can lead to mental health, that can lead to less creativity, more burnout, not being able to cope with things that we used to be able to do. So I think it's a really important time right now to utilize our support system, but also be able to disconnect from social media at times, be able to use our therapists and great practitioners out there. Here at Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, which we primarily work with substance use and mental health, we have noticed that during this time, a lot of resources such as AA and NA have gone virtual. A lot of support systems that they had have gone virtual, and that's different. And people have not been able to quickly be able to kind of jump into that at times. And that's just something that we're kind of figuring out. And substance use is on a rise, and mental health is on a rise because of a lot of these things.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know there's a personal aspect of how to maneuver all of this that's going on right now. I know also some of you out there listening might be coming from kind of a standpoint of actually being an employer and coming from a company standpoint. How do you actually support and help your employees through a time like this? And I want to divert this over to Michael. Michael, I would love to hear from you, just of your perspective on any insight that you would have, maybe something that you guys have found helpful of how to really support your employees right now when a lot of people are experiencing some pretty intense emotions.
Yeah, I think we think about it as you got to start with a foundation of true empathy in your culture, in your company. I think that's the basis of everything. It's not just about mental health, but really caring about people and their lives. I think that's the foundation. If you don't have that in your company or your team, now's the best time as ever to start that. Another thing we've been doing is just acknowledging, as you did, Dustin and others, how hard it is right now. I mean, I think as companies, we tend to go right away to, all right, let's get on Zoom, let's figure this out, we're going to get the server, and those are all important things to do as a business. But talking about the emotional part of this change and the emotional part of how hard this is equally important, and maybe more important. Our talent head of talent's been really great every week, just telling people, do your best. These are not normal times. We are not going to be able to do our normal work during these times, and it's okay. Some days it's going to be just hang in there, and that's fine. Other days you might be able to be more productive, and that's great too. But just do your best. We can't have the same expectations as we do ordinarily. We've been doing a lot of our own business updates, but also emotional updates as a company and as leadership, and acknowledging we're struggling too. We believe strong leadership isn't about, we got this covered and we're fine, we're okay, but this is hard, and showing the fact that we're struggling at times with this too is okay, and it actually makes you human, and it makes people really feel like they're not alone in this. And lastly, PTO. People are scared to use PTO right now, and they can't go on vacations or feel like they can't go on vacations, but there's probably no more time that's best used to use that PTO. And get away. Everybody needs to go spend a day or two away, unplug, recharge. So that's the other thing we've really been encouraging people to do, is take that PTO, find the time, and recharge.
I love that. And I love what you said about doing your best. It's amazing how much pressure we put on ourselves, right? And especially during a time like this, I think that's such a good reminder. Michael, thank you so much. Adriana, I want to check in with you, and is there anything that you from the perspective of somebody, I mean, you've been very open that you've shared your own struggles with mental health. What that's like, right? To struggle with your mental health. What do you say to a coworker? And this can obviously just extend over to a friend as well, right? What do you generally recommend as far as what to say to somebody if you really feel like they are struggling right now?
Yeah, I think for me personally, when I open up, I just need someone that's going to actively listen. So sometimes as a coworker, you don't really have the right words to say to someone that's opening up and being vulnerable about what's going on. So just listening to them and letting them vent to you about their frustrations, their struggles, and just saying, I'm here for you, I support you. Sometimes they might just have too much on your plate. So it's asking them, what can I take off of your plate so that you can relax, take time to kind of ease through work. And, you know, even if my plate is full, taking that work off of them might really, really help them. They might just feel so overwhelmed with everything happening, not being able to focus. So anything that you can do to kind of support them and help them through that. And for me, it's great to approach it more like a friend instead of a coworker. Like, oh, you should talk to your boss about that. Kind of just have that friendship relationship with them so that they feel safe talking to you about everything going on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Miles, I want to check in with you here. And what, you know, I know that I want to touch on this kind of issue of burnout. And I think, you know, the advertising industry, I would imagine, very fast paced, as is the world that we live in. I think every industry certainly is. What have you learned about how to kind of approach this idea of not having your employees be burning out mentally, but yourself too? Is there something that you've learned along the way to kind of prevent burnout?
Solid question. And actually, Brian, given an earlier statement that you had said about anxiety, as someone who deals with anxiety daily, I think, and I know that this comes up in questions, right, when people are looking at applying for jobs or just culture of not only in the agency world, but corporate world in and of itself, like how do you avoid burnout? And quite honestly, I think avoiding burnout will never happen. I think the acceptance that burnout is going to be there is step one, right? From there, it's an understanding of, okay, well, how do you at least stretch that time between burnouts out as far as you can? And then also understanding your coworkers, colleagues, clients, whoever, that emotional intelligence of what's going to refill their tank, right? I think this is something that we do at Squid, where it's really important you understand the individual. I think it's a mistake to do something that's an overarching, like this is going to work for everybody. And that's not the case. And I'm sure everybody here would align with that, right? We all have our own ways of picking ourselves back up. We will hit that point where we're tired and exhausted and thinking like we don't want to create anymore because someone's just been tearing that work apart over and over and over again. As a leader, identifying when someone is reaching that point and doing what you can, like Adriana said, to offload some of that work and actually get in the trenches, right? Myself, I'm sure Michael's in the same boat. I'm sure Mike's in the same boat of getting next to the employees, regardless of your status as an agency, and working alongside them. But also, PTO, taking that time away is really important. And understanding what is going to fill someone's cup, because it doesn't necessarily need to be as grand as like, look, take the day off. It could be something as simple as just acknowledging the fact that you know that someone is working their ass off, right? Small micro moments all the way up to, look, you've just put in a ton of work. Go disconnect, do something to just recharge. Everything in between kind of, like I said, we're never going to avoid burnout, but we can recover faster because of it and come back fresh with new ideas and new perspectives, given everything that we've just learned. So that embrace of burnout and that it's going to happen, but understand kind of the triggers and the cues with it is what we practice.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. So, Sue, I'm curious, you do so much work in the mental health community, and I know you're talking to so many different people, and you have so many beautiful perspectives, I think, on all of this. Are you seeing anything that that workplaces are doing really well, or something that you think is really helping people when it comes to mental health to really foster an environment where this stuff can be talked about?
Yeah, I've seen a couple things. So one is talking about it, making sure that maybe in your lunchroom that you've got materials about mental health. making sure that at least on a monthly basis, your employees know what your employee assistance benefits are. I can tell you, no one knows what they are. No one. And so if you're not telling them all the time, they're not going to use it. And we know that when we look at the data, few employees use their EAP programs because they don't really know about it. I think another thing is where managers and people higher up are actually also sharing their stories. We know that the research says that the best way to change public attitudes around mental illness is when someone shares their story, because we can look at them and say, oh, well, there's someone like me. And I think that's really important. And then also thinking about, I don't like to call it work-life balance, but work-life harmony. So there's got to be a time when you're on and a time when you're off, and you get to decide that. But also making sure that you're encouraging your employees not to. So I work a lot of hours, but I tell my employees after 6 o'clock, do not answer my emails. I don't want to hear from you. If I really need you, I will call you or I'll text you, but don't do that. And then the last thing that we've seen, and we've actually even been able to do it here in a small nonprofit, we have a quiet room. So we have a place where people can go. There's adult coloring. There's, there's a water thing that you can plug in. There's yoga mats. We actually have SAD lights, seasonal affective disorder lights that people can take. So just a place where when you're just getting so overwhelmed, you can do that. The last thing I'll say, and there's a lot of really cheap things that that we do here as well, is we have, not right now, of course, because of COVID, but before COVID, we had a twice weekly walking club. So for 15 minutes, people would walk around the block. And that's really helpful, of course, to get the endorphins moving in your brain. Twice a week, we'd have a meditation using a Calm or Headspace app and just walking through it. These are things that are about as cheap as you can get, right? You spend that much time looking at Facebook or Twitter during the day. So really kind of encouraging those kinds of things are also really helpful.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Sue. I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions in our Q&A function here on the bottom of Zoom. You'll see it down there. I believe that's where everybody can find it. And we are getting a couple of questions. And I think one person saying, and I should mention too, that you can do that anonymously. So you don't have to have your name on there if that's something that you're trying to be mindful of. But Dr. Brockberg, I think this would be a great question for you to answer. Somebody asked, how do you balance trying to manage your own mental health versus being the person that other people rely on? And I would imagine that's such a very real thing for a lot of people. Do you have anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I mean, we've all heard the term that we can't help somebody else unless we help ourselves. And I think that's a really great way of kind of capturing that we have to find our own balance within our own responsibilities at work, but also our own balance when we go home. Somebody was talking about the idea of work-life balance and work-life harmony. And I think there's also an interesting piece to this that work is not usual right now. Home is not usual right now. Where you usually do go to stop or to unwind or disconnect is changed. And so the way that you used to balance how you manage your mental health with how others depend on you has become really a really important issue. One thing, here that we noticed here at Hazelden Betty Ford is a lot of leaders have really reached out and are sending more emails and more just ways to acknowledge this is tough. This is not fun right now. I want to join with you in this. And that's been really just normalizing, and a lot of empathy has come from that. But in the same breath, being able to use our EAP or let them know, here are the resources, so you're not the only one being leaned on. I think a lot of people want to take on that role and help their employees and help people get through a tough time, but we're also going through a tough time ourselves. And so finding a way to have a boundary there is really important. Yeah.
And then another question that was asked of Michael, actually, Michael, they're wondering, how do you get those conversations started at your agency? Was it an employee who brought it up, or leadership? I assume they're just referring to talking about mental health and things like that within the agency. Anything that you want to respond to there?
Yeah, for us, we had a wellness week, part of Wellness Month, about a year ago, and I took the opportunity to share my personal story, which I'm fortunate enough not to battle with mental health issues, but I have 2 adult children who had and still do battle with anxiety and depression, One of them had a suicide attempt, another one battled with some addiction too. And with their blessing, I shared their journey and their story along with my own, and our families working through that and understanding and all the learning and education and changing of perspective that had. And I'll tell you, it was the toughest presentation I've ever given. But I believe perhaps the most important one I've ever given. And I think it just helps tell people they're not alone. Again, that gets in that vulnerability, me sharing tough, vulnerable things, says it's okay in this space to talk about those things. It's encouraged to talk about those things. We care, we have empathy around this. We treat mental illness as the same as any other medical issue or other things. So I think that's where we kind of came in, and it started something, and it begins conversations, but you got to keep having those conversations.
Yeah. It's a continuing dialogue.
Yeah.
Adriana, I'm curious with you. I'm always so fascinated to hear people that have really stepped out and started sharing their story and talking about it, just kind of what that experience has been like for you. What have you learned about yourself, and just kind of curious about your journey since you really started talking openly? Is there anything that really sticks out to you?
I think you learn a lot about yourself and your boundaries. So before, like, I have panic attacks constantly, and I never wanted to talk about them, and I never did anything that would trigger those panic attacks. But as soon as I really opened up and owned the fact that this is who I am, I'm super anxious constantly, I break down all the time, I really started to push myself a lot more. So I found the things that triggered me, and I started to just poke at them until I started to feel okay with being in that moment of anxiety, and that's helped me a lot. It's really scary to open up, especially when you have a lot of people hearing about it, but you grow so much when you start to really openly discuss all of the mental health issues that you have and owning who you are all the time.
Yeah. Is there something that you come back to a lot of as far as like how you maneuver and kind of manage your mental health on a day-to-day basis, things that you find really helpful just personally for you?
Yeah, I mean, the journey with mental health changes every single day, every week, every month. So it's kind of, one day might be a really, really bad day. And at night, it's figuring out what made this day so bad so that I avoid that or I challenge that thing. For me, it's just building a routine every day and finding that routine that works for me for the way that I'm feeling. So one day I might want to just cry and eat a large pizza by myself. Other days I want to be eating salads and go for a walk. So it's kind of ever changing and kind of listening to your body, listening to your mind, and figuring out what do you need at that moment in time and doing that instead of ignoring that because it only worsens the problem.
Yeah. Miles, kind of same question for you. You've said on here that you've been pretty open about your struggles with mental health and just the journey that you've been on. What do you find helpful for you? Is there something that, I know I personally always talk about kind of this idea of having a mental health toolkit, that there's kind of like what Adriana said, that, every day, for me, actually, every minute can feel differently than the minute before. So I know it's kind of an ever evolving process, but do you find things that are really helpful for you every day?
Definitely. And actually, to piggyback on what Adriana said, I have found through dealing with this, anxiety and depression my entire life, routine is actually incredibly important. And especially when you're in a creative field, which you're pulling stuff out of thin air, if you can stay in a lane for at least a little bit, right? And then dart out to other directions and pull from that, there's at least some semblance of routine there.
Yeah.
But like Adriana said, right? Like, and what you've said, Bryan, every day is different. Every moment is different. And again, to piggyback on Adriana, listening to your body and what it needs is really important. That self-reflection period, I think, often goes unchecked. A lot of people, I mean, that's a tough thing, right? To ask someone to look at themselves and assess themselves. Not everybody has that skill set. I can't even sit here and say like I've mastered that, right? Every day I still look at that there, and there's an inherent ego involved in our industry. I constantly battle with both. In terms of like what makes me feel better every day, one, I'm at the point now in my life and career where I know where those triggers are. So I can start to predict when things are coming up. Of course, there are things that are going to go off course, but taking time for myself and that, work-life harmony, as Sue said, like I know that there are go-to things that I can do that are going to pull me out of that. Part of that is like singing in the car at the top of my lungs. I will be that guy at a stoplight that's horribly embarrassing himself and off key, but you'll see me there because you can't really care. Like that's what does it. And also like, I was an athlete in a former life. Athletics and that the exercise and the exertion of energy is a way that anxiety I've found is like the immediate release. Granted, it's a little bit more temporary than anything else for me, but even that temporary relief is important. So those are, some of the things, again, finding what is going to make you happy, even though that toolkit might be small, and making the time for yourself, which is really tough. I'm oversimplifying it, but those are kind of the things.
Yeah. So can you sing for us now?
No.
I'm just
No.
Just
this is enough for me.
Yeah, let's not push it. Let's not go too far. No, I think that's so good. And I always try to mention too with that. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but I always think it's important to note that like everybody's toolkit looks so different. That doesn't need to be meditating on top of a cliff every day. Meditation happens to be something that I really enjoy and I find very helpful, but that doesn't work for everybody. So I think that's always such a good thing for people to think about. We're getting some questions here. Sarah is asking, what was the point at which you knew that you needed to seek help for your mental illness? I don't know if that's something that either Miles or Adriana wants to touch on. Maybe Adriana, let's start with you.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I would say it was definitely in college when I decided that I needed help, and I was just at rock bottom. Getting out of bed was super hard. I lost who I was entirely. I wasn't going to class. With my eating disorder especially, I was passing out constantly, could barely walk or carry anything. And that was kind of the moment I realized like I am a complete train wreck and I need to figure it out and I need to talk to someone about it. And it was super scary to come to that moment, but I was just looking at everyone else like living their lives and being happy, and for some reason I just couldn't figure out why I wasn't that. So I needed to figure that out because I was terrified. I just felt scared. So when I was in that dark place, that's kind of when I decided I need to really figure this out and not be terrified of being on medication or going to a therapist. And all of a sudden you hear other people who are going through the exact same thing, and then it's makes you feel more normal. So for me, it was just being at rock bottom, finding out that I'm there, and then just trying to become better.
Yeah, and I know that talking to talking from kind of a workplace lens here, I know that talking to a boss or talking to somebody at work when you are really struggling can be a really scary, overwhelming thing, because we start worrying about things like job security and not wanting to appear weak and all of that. I know that a lot of that comes into play here. And I want to ask you, do you have any advice for people as far as how to talk about this stuff at work, how to go to your boss and say, I'm really, really struggling, and I just to open up that dialogue. Any insight from you?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say about 99% of the time, your boss already knows that you're struggling. I mean, they're noticing that your workload, you're not able to handle your workload. Maybe you're a little bit more on edge. You don't have the stamina that you had. They're going to notice that. And so I think it's important as a boss or a manager to go to someone and say, not to try to diagnose them, but to say, here's what I'm seeing. Are you okay? Is there something I can do to help? And people are usually, we kind of say it's not so much the stigma surrounding mental illness anymore. It's really that people are afraid of discrimination. And so people are afraid to go to their boss because they're afraid that they're going to lose their job. They won't get promoted. They won't get a raise, all of those kinds of things. And so I think that if as a boss or a manager, you're noticing those things, going to that person first and saying, here's what I'm noticing, actually opens up the door to say, yeah, I'm having a hard time. And it could be due to a whole number of reasons, not just that you're struggling with your mental health. You could have had a death in the family, or someone could be sick, or you could have a child who is struggling with their mental health right now, or a spouse. So it could be a number of things, but I think it's really important that we talk about what we see and then open up that door.
Yeah. Michael, from your perspective, what do you recommend to people if they want to, if somebody wanted to come to you and talk to you about them struggling with their mental health, how do you recommend people do that?
Well, I mean, first of all, they should be talking to those who they feel comfortable with. If it's me because they feel a connection that I've shared, then great, but it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be their boss. It could be somebody who's got a great talent group, it could be somebody there. But I encourage them to figure out a way that they feel comfortable reaching out to say, hey, I'd love to talk about this. It could be a conversation. Some people don't feel comfortable having a conversation. They'd rather write a note. And then, find a safe place that they feel like they can share. And then you listen and try to support them and navigate through that. But every situation is going to be different. Every organization is going to have a different kind of culture about how empathetic they are and understanding. Every boss is going to be different. Every dynamic is going to be different. And every person's willingness and comfort and how they express that is going to be different.
Yeah.
So I would just have people follow their gut and what they feel is going to be the best way to navigate it.
Yeah. Miles, somebody in this question mentioned you in there, said, in advertising and media, it's very easy to take rejection of work and ideas really personally, especially in a society that attaches a lot of self-worth to our professions. How do you separate the two? Anything you want to add to that or say to that?
Unfortunately, my gut, I saw that question come through. My gut is you don't. Like, you create, right? Like all of us here, we're creators. I think that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation about mental health and advertising and marketing is there is an inherent attachment to what we produce. That being said, right, the complete separation I don't think is there, but the ways to manage that certainly are. And just as what we do at Squid, right, there are going to be times, and I know everyone around this panel and probably watching, there are moments where you get client feedback that you're like, they are making the wrong decision. And some of it's cathartic when you just have an open bitching session, right? And you allow that processing of, your work being watered down in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's at least we embrace that at Squid. Whether that's okay or not, I don't know. I'm sure Dustin and Sue have other, tactics or ways of dealing with that. But I think it's my responsibility as a leader to pull people out of that when it gets to a certain point, right? But I do believe that there is a self-expression that should come with, like, if you're upset about it, I think it's okay to vent. Holding that in doesn't do anybody any good. And we're very open about that at our office of, okay, let's get it out. Let's just kind of explain all the reasons why this is a bad idea. But at the same time, it's picking and choosing your battles. Not every single thing is a battle that we need to be involved in. And some of it can be really nitpicky. So that understanding is one thing. And I think the other thing, like I said, it's okay to not be okay about that.
Absolutely. Dr. Brockberg, I want to bring you into this. Do you, for people out there that maybe are in a work environment or in a situation that just doesn't feel very healthy mentally and doesn't feel like, they're being very supportive of things like mental health and not facilitating those kinds of conversations, how do you maneuver that? How do you bring that up? How do you kind of maybe recognize if you're in a situation and in an environment that just doesn't feel particularly healthy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard situation. I think too many folks are in that situation, unfortunately. I think in a lot of ways, similar to what others have said here, Miles and Michael, around the idea of finding someone that you can confide in, that you can feel support in, is important. To have an ally there somewhere is always going to be helpful. I also think what Sue said around the EAP can be another avenue where you can go and get some help that is kind of removed from your position in your job. Or I've heard people, make different ethics complaints if they feel like their needs aren't being met. I mean, there's a lot of ways to advocate for what you need. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of individuals will, just as we've kind of talked about, just kind of subdue down, push down these feelings and these thoughts, and that creates resentment, and that leads to the idea of burnout, which we were talking about. So it is extremely important to kind of think about that.
Actually, a question for you, Dr. Brockberg. This is a really good question. So an anonymous comment here said, how does stereotypical agency culture, things like afternoon happy hour, free beer, client events, all of that, affect mental health and addiction in the advertising world?
That's really interesting. I mean, again, that's also a very complicated question. And I think, as we already alluded to, that each culture, each person is going to approach that differently based on a myriad of factors to that. It does create, it can create a culture that is normal, that is how one person might cope. And that can be misguided at times. And so it's not uncommon in a lot of fields, not even just in the ad field, but in a lot of fields, for happy hours or certain ways of how we talk about work, certain ways of how we talk about failures and successes that can get really maladaptive in some ways. So I definitely think that if we are using those types of ways to congratulate, or those type of ways of trying to separate, finding alternative ways will be equally helpful, because that can lead to some issues down the road.
And just a comment here from Garen. Garen said, it's never too early to ask for help with your mental health or speak to someone. Absolutely, and thanks for the comment there. A reminder that you can ask questions in the Q&A function down at the bottom. We'll do our best to get to as many of those. Great questions so far. Keep it coming. We definitely want to hear from all of you out there. Adriana, I want to go to you and talk about working remotely. I know that's what's happening with most of us right now. Are you finding that helpful? Are you finding that harder for your mental health? Has that been bringing up any particular challenges for you?
Yeah, I mean, when working remote first started, my bed and my office, that was like my safe space. So I would leave work frustrated and I would go home and I would just unplug and unwind at home. So working from home, I don't have that separation. So I'm a very routine person that helps my anxiety. So I had to figure out a whole new day-to-day routine that fit working from home. So I have like my desk, and I don't sit at my desk unless I'm actually working, and I don't work from my bed. So it's building that separation. And the one positive thing that came from working from home was that I had all of this time in the morning, because I didn't have to commute and I didn't have to get ready and do my makeup and do my hair or pick an outfit. So I was able to kind of throw new things into my day-to-day morning and night routine that helped that. So taking time in the morning to enjoy coffee fully and being in that moment. I started journaling. I started actually making breakfast. I was able to take my dog on longer walks. So it was kind of finding joy in these small moments throughout the day and the morning really helped with working from home. And, having anxiety with being remote, it's sometimes super hard to focus because I'm with my pets all the time and they're arguing in the background and doing all this stuff. And it's kind of ignoring that. And both my dog and cat have figured out, like, all right, mom's home all the time, but that doesn't mean it's playtime always, because I just kind of shut them out. I'm like, nope, you're usually in the kennel all day, Winston. So I'm not going to treat you with all of these pets and cuddles. So it's kind of figuring out what that day-to-day looks like and, finding that new routine that really helps you and boosts your creativity.
My dog has figured out how to open up doors during quarantine, and he's been barging into a lot of my Zoom meetings, which has been very fascinating to watch that happen. So the struggle is very real there. Miles, how about you working remotely? I don't know if that's something that you've been doing, but have you seen that present any unique challenges?
Yeah, I'll say, so I mean, certainly at the start of all of this, working remote, granted, we structured Squid at the very beginning 5 years ago to be a remote agency, and it didn't really work for us, which is kind of a fun thing to be like, okay, cool, that's what we thought, then it didn't happen, and now we're going back to that. We as a team, what we found was helpful. There's an isolation, right? To everything that Adriana said, of the separation between where you live and where you work, I think is really important. But isolation in and of itself, right, can be a trigger for anybody who is managing mental health. So we would end up doing, just as a team or different teams or whatever, just popping up Zoom calls and having that on the entire day, just so that you had like some sort of communication back and forth, whether you were talking with someone the entire time or not. You were able to at least bounce ideas off of one another in real time. I mean, there are tools like Slack and GChat and all of that which do that, but we found that something like that was a little bit more helpful. So we started implementing that. But then you have, with the country starting to open back up and the murder of George Floyd, you've got a whole other set of emotions and the spectrum that kind of you deal with that. And we were fortunate, we're a small enough agency by design that we went back into the office a few weeks ago. But given everything that the city's going through right now, right, we're doing things together. And I think coming out of isolation for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and coming together as a unit is making us stronger. But, like I said, if we were at a bigger agency, what I would be doing is setting up with my work friends these Zoom calls and doing exactly that, is just having that interaction, especially for someone who deals with mental health daily. I can retreat and be isolating like by nature. That's just who I am. And I'm sure the AdFed people are like, yeah, I'm usually the guy in the corner. But it's been like, I've had to put myself there to make sure that I'm healthy and happy. And thankfully I have a team that notices that and acknowledges it, right? They're supportive of me.
Absolutely. A question here, somebody said in agencies, there's a lot of pressure to always say yes to clients, even when they ask for unreasonable requests that end up leading to high anxiety and stress. How do you approach the conversation with your clients and coworkers in a professional manner? I'm thinking maybe Michael, is that something that you wanna touch on?
Oh, great. Give me the tough question of how to deal with clients' demands. Yeah.
I have great faith in you.
Yeah, well, I think this is a big one and a big part of the stress, and we've talked about burnout too. And the fact of the matter is, it's getting harder and harder in our industry to deal with some of the timelines that we're having, the demands, and the sort of relentlessness of it all, and then the changes that happen. And some of those changes are, necessary on the client side too. So it's it's not unreasonable, but it's the reality of it. And I think. We've tried to protect some people if they've been through that gauntlet before, and that's part of that, is to figure out how to make sure that we're aware and conscious and supportive of people who have been sort of overworked and kind of done that. And then sometimes it is about having that conversation like this sucks. We got to do it. We've got to figure out a way to do it. How do we best do it in a way that we're not adding to the swirl? And we spend a lot of time in our company really trying to make sure that we aren't creating more work and more anxiety and bad working dynamics that adds on top of what is already hard to answer for the clients. So that's what we really try to focus on. We can't control. We talk about there's a bunch of things out in our world, and now even more, that we can't control. And it's hard. We wish we'd like to, but you can't. So, but what can we control? We can control how we deal with each other, how we deal with an assignment, how we address it, and how we manage it. And that's what we really try to focus on.
Thank you. That was, great. Social media is something that we haven't maybe really touched on a ton, and I know that it deeply plays into mental health. And a question that came in here for Adriana, somebody said, as someone who works in social media, it can be really hard to escape one of the most harmful things for mental health, social media, especially as it is a 24/7 industry. how do you escape and recharge? And Adriana, I bet that's a really tough thing when that's your livelihood, right? You're so immersed in that world.
Yeah, I kind of time my day out with, this is the time where I am doing client social media, and this is the time that I allow myself to do personal social media. And by the end of the day, of the workday, if I am super overwhelmed, I'm not going to do the personal social media stuff. I think finding time to recharge when it's always on and you're always getting notifications is extremely, extremely difficult. But some weekends, I just completely shut my phone off and I will sleep for 14 hours because that's what I need. I do a lot of social media detoxes. So I find myself following a lot of people on Instagram, and then a week later, like, they don't stand for the same things I do, and seeing the things that they post makes me feel down. So just unfollow them, mute notifications as much as possible, and just come to the realization that people share the best versions of themselves online. So you should never be comparing yourself to this ideal person that shares all of these edited photos with filters and they make themselves look amazing and they share the happy moments, because that's not real life. They do have negative moments. They just choose not to share that. And clients will always share the best versions of themselves as well. So they put a lot of work into appearing really great online and appearing greater than their competitors, but they have issues too. So, I might be doing work for one brand and then their competitor is doing work that's absolutely way better than what I'm doing, but they could also have 3 times the amount of people working on their social media, where we don't have all of those people working on that as well. So it's kind of figuring out, what's realistic and what's not. And when you feel like something isn't realistic, disconnect from that and just let yourself breathe. You don't have to be checking all of your Instagram notifications. You can take a weekend, sleep it off, just turn your phone off and don't engage with people online.
Yeah. So getting help. I know that there's likely people on this webinar that are maybe this is a really new thing to start talking about mental health, and maybe there's a lot of struggle going on, and the idea of going to see a therapist and the idea of reaching out maybe feels really, really overwhelming and really, really scary. I know that I look back when I went to a counselor, I know how intensely scary that can be. I want to talk to Sue about that. Sue, what do you as far as reaching out and really trying to work on your mental health, whether that's seeing a therapist, whether that's accessing resources in the community, what kind of guidance do you have for people around that?
So the best thing you can do is actually call the back of your insurance card. You really need to make sure that you're going to see someone who your insurance covers. And we don't think about that because, you go to your family practice, whatever, but you really need to look at that first. I would also suggest there's several organizations, including NAMI, that have peer-led support groups. So they are run by people who are experiencing something similar. We have ones for anxiety and for all other mental illnesses, and ones for families as well. And that can actually be really helpful. So I think the other thing you want to do is make sure it's not something else, that it's not a thyroid problem or something like that. So also going to your family practitioner to say, I just haven't been feeling myself. There are lots of online tools that you can also do. Mental Health America has some online depression tools, so you can see where you fall in that. But I think like any other healthcare condition, the earlier you identify it and treat it, the better the outcomes.
Yeah.
And Brian, I was wondering if I could just mention one other thing that was part of the discussion, is that a mental illness is actually covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if someone has a diagnosis, they need to know that they are protected by that act. Now they have to disclose it to their employer in order to request accommodations. But the other thing I know is very few employers, because we do a class, a 1-hour lunch and learn for employers, very few employers know what an accommodation is for mental illness. They know what it is if someone's in a wheelchair, if someone is deaf or hard of hearing, but they have no idea what it is for a mental illness. And there's lots of good resources out there, including the Job Accommodation Network, and the American Psychiatric Society also has a list of accommodations, and we do as well. But I just wanted to make sure that people knew that because it's an important thing.
Yeah, well, and all that stuff is so scary to maneuver. I know firsthand when you're really struggling, then you're adding like things like insurance on top of trying to that just compounds your mental health situation. So I think just acknowledging that it can feel really complicated, but just like one step at a time.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much. Dr. Brockberg, picking a therapist and starting to work with a therapist for people out there that maybe aren't doing that yet. I hear from people that just say, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. Like there's all these therapists online, how do I even get started in that process? Anything that you want to mention there?
Sure, and I'm sure Sue can also speak to this as well. I think when you picking a therapist, once we've found your network, found out who's covered for you, oftentimes in a lot of mental health clinics, they'll have a big list of all the clinicians, the bios, and you can read the bio and read about where they get educated, how do they approach therapy, what are their kind of theoretical orientations. Do they look nice or funny? It can be really silly like that too of, I'm going to connect better with a male or a female or someone that's old or someone that's younger. And everyone has their own preference to that. And I think the idea of connecting with a therapist is very effective on just the actual relationship side of it. And so finding a good therapist that you can connect to is incredibly important versus just having a therapist, but having a therapist that you actually can align with and trust.
Beautiful. A question that came through, and I know we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I want to make sure that we just acknowledge this comment. It said from an anonymous person on here said, working from home, does someone have any advice on the anxiety and the guilt that people may feel when working from home and not getting as much done maybe as what they're used to doing? Is there anybody that wants to jump in on that?
I'm going to call it grace and space. We are under a whole lot of stress. There's such uncertainty. If you're trying to teach your children at home at the same time as you're trying to work, that is mind-blowing, frankly. And so just kind of recognizing I'm not going to be on my A game every day and every hour of the day, and give yourself the grace and space to say, I'm just not doing my best today, and that's okay. I think that's really important. I think sometimes people push themselves for perfectionism, and especially if you're trying to teach your children at home, you got to throw that out the window. I had, younger friends who were sitting there the first week when their children were at home and they were trying to teach them. They're like, I'm going to do French over lunch and then we're going to make omelets. And I'm like, really? And people are like, okay, I got them to do an hour of their homework and that's all I'm going to be able to do. So you have to just be realistic in this particular time of our lives.
Yeah. Mantra that I keep coming back to in my own life is progress, not perfection. Just moving forward day in and day out, even if that's 1 millimeter. It doesn't need to look perfect. Just, keep kind of moving with it in one step at a time and not be so hard on ourselves. A comment here from somebody. Oh, does somebody want to chime in there?
Yeah, Brian, I'll,
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, from that perspective, I remember specifically when I started Squid 5 years ago and left my corporate gig, I was working from home, didn't have an office yet. I think we're wired as a culture to be busy all the time. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that because working from home is really, really tough. That transition, I think, is really tough, pandemic, regardless. Just because inherently it's that guilt that was addressed in the question comes in when you're not constantly on. I would say it took me probably a good 6 months to be comfortable with working from home, which also probably doesn't help in this answer. But part of that is understanding, right? Even if you're at work, you're physically in a seat, but you're not necessarily working the entire time, right? You're in meetings with people, you're talking with coworkers, you're getting coffee. There's perspective to that in being in an office. So it's really tough because you're at home, and it's comfortable. But I would say that discomfort is really, really common. Like I said, regardless of the situation, and to just keep things in perspective, that work and that time that you'd spend is probably the same time that you'd spend at your desk. It's just you didn't go there today.
And Michael, I'm not sure, is there something that you wanted to say too?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I acknowledge that there's a lot of people who are the highest performers who also have high anxiety, and oftentimes it can be hidden because they are driven. And that, so I hear that a little bit of that comment of like feeling guilty about not doing as much work. And yes, there's the do your best part, but there's also we as an industry have to acknowledge, and as leaders and coworkers, that there may be people who are working even harder and hiding more of their anxiety through that. And I think we opened this whole conversation with a really sad tribute to Doug Atkins. He's a great example of somebody who is a huge high achiever. So, and I think this industry has a lot of those people who are driven and are performance based and really evaluate, they have their own self-worth on their output, whether it's creative or otherwise. And that's a tough dynamic. We haven't really talked about some of the ills and the hard part of our industry that adds to that, and I think that's one of them.
Yeah. A comment that came through, somebody said, if you try a therapist and you don't connect, don't necessarily give up on therapy. Try somebody new. Don't feel like you have to stick with the first therapist that you start with. It's about finding the right fit, and that can certainly be a process. I want to be mindful of time here, and I know that there's so much more that goes into this conversation, but I want to give everybody on the panel kind of one last word and one last opportunity just to share, if there's anything else on your mind, anything else that you want to add, maybe just kind of one message that you really want people to take away from this conversation. And I also just want to acknowledge that for all of you out there listening, can't thank you enough for being a part of this. I know that sometimes, just showing up for a conversation like this is actually an act of courage, because we don't always talk about these things openly, especially in the workplace. So thank you for being part of it. And I want to start, let's go to Dr. Brockberg and just give you a chance to say any final words that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think, something just to kind of leave you with is the idea that this is, an incredible time right now, that it's important that we continue to try to cope, but also continue to try to thrive in the same breath. I think it's when we encounter all these different stresses, we often change our eating habits, we change our exercise habits, we change a lot of our normal routine. A lot of folks have talked about the idea of structure, and it's important to regain that in our own new world. And I want to also just comment to the finding a new therapist. If it's not working out, therapy is hard. Being able to be vulnerable in therapy is not an easy process, and it can be easy to kind of want to walk away from that. And I encourage everyone to kind of be vulnerable in that sense too. So thank you for letting me be here.
Oh, thank you for being part of it. Beautiful stuff. Adriana, how about you? Any final words?
Yeah, I would say just open up about the way that you're feeling and the issues that you're experiencing, whether that's a friend, a family member, a coworker. It's obviously a tough discussion to have and to open up, but it's really amazing, and it takes a weight off of your shoulders to kind of express the way that you're feeling to someone else and own the person that you are all the time. So if you're feeling down, own the fact that you're feeling down. If you're on a high, feel that high and kind of live it out until the next low, and just find the routine that best fits you. Find the workplace that you feel at home in. And if you feel uncomfortable with the workplace that you're in and down and you can't talk to anyone at work, or you don't feel comfortable with that, find another place to go that makes you feel complete.
So good. Thank you so much. Sue, how about you?
Well, I want to say that if you see a friend or a family member that you think is struggling with their mental health, perhaps you see changes, that they're not liking the things that they used to do, they're sleeping too much or too little, all of those kinds of signs, that you need to ask them. You need to reach in. When someone's really depressed, they're not going to reach out, so you need to reach in. And if you're worried about someone in terms of taking their own life, you need to ask. Asking does not plant the idea. Ask them directly, are you thinking about killing yourself? And if they say yes, then reach out to the resources, which I know on another slide you're going to see. But do not be afraid to ask.
Thank you, Sue. Michael, let's send it over to you.
Well, I've talked a little bit about empathy and how important I think it is as far as a company and a a group, and how you can have that. And I guess I love the fact that we're having this conversation, and it's part of that empathy that we can create. So thank you, AdFed and Mike and everybody on the panel for doing this and inviting me on this, and everybody who's listening in. This is a big part of it. And I would just, I guess I'd make one other hopeful comment about how difficult it is right now, and in many ways the sort of almost global trauma that we are probably all experiencing is that I think it has opened up some eyes. I hope it has opened up some eyes and awareness about how difficult it can be with your own mental health as you're navigating through this. And I hope that creates greater empathy culturally, ability to talk about this more, a greater awareness. That's what I'm most hopeful for. These are tough times, but there can be good that comes out of it, and that's what I'm holding on to.
Thank you for your voice, Michael. Really appreciate that. And then Miles, any final words from you?
Yeah, I'll try to make it short and sweet and bullet point it. First things first, to echo Adriana, and actually what Michael has said too, each agency, especially if you're familiar with building a brand, right, and you do brand identity work or anything like that, every agency in town has its own culture and internal brand. Find one that works for you. And I know that Agency Squid is not for everybody. I'm sure Michael knows that Mono's not for everybody, and Mike knows that Mcvoy is not for everybody. Find the agency that fits you culturally. And I think that's, as I've talked to people who are trying to enter the industry or navigate it, that's more important than the work that's being done, because you're going to fall in love with the work as long as you fall in love with the people and they understand you for who you are. So there are agencies that do that really well in town, and I would just, that's the first thing that I would say. The next thing, this is I talk openly about my mental health, but this is the first time that I've been able to speak on a platform like this. So I just want to thank you all for sharing this with me, because I don't know if anybody has seen, but I've been taking notes through this between what everybody said. So I'm actually coming away with this as a panelist. I'm super stoked about that. And then lastly, on that same note, Bryan, you as a moderator for this, not only speaking of, the position that I'm in now, but also with AdFed, you've made this conversation what it is. So thank you so much for being that. And thanks to Mike for bringing this topic up. It's something that I hope AdFed continues to champion, not only now, but through the course of the year and years to come. So thank you guys.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. And Sue mentioned it earlier. I think, having the courage to share your story is really how change starts to happen. And so to all of you on here, Miles, Adriana, everybody that's been so open, Michael, just everybody, having that courage to come forward and be vulnerable can feel really, really scary and can feel really uncomfortable. And yet it is so deeply powerful. And so just being a part of this conversation, you'll never really know the ripple effects of that. So thank you all for allowing me to be part of this. Truly an honor. And I'm gonna send it over now to Michelle Benson, who you heard from at the beginning, to kind of wrap things up. And I know you have some really beautiful, important resources.
Yeah, thank you, Bryan. Most of what I'm going to say now is a reiteration of what everyone else has said, but I think it's worth doing so. So first, thank you again to all of our panelists and Bryan and Mike for sharing your stories and your perspectives and helping educate all of us on here about mental health in the community. So thank you, everybody. Next, I just want to say help is available. Sue talked about a couple of different resources. I think Dustin mentioned a few as well. We have some resources just listed here in some slides. You can find a therapist near you. You could, Sue's recommendation to look at your insurance first is a great one. This is also another resource that you can use to find a therapist. In addition, we've got the suicide prevention Lifeline listed, as well as the National Crisis Text Line. I'll take a moment just to mention also that You may have noticed that we've been recording this webinar. We will be posting it on the adfed.org website in a blog post, along with information on these links and these resources for you. So if you didn't get a chance to write it down, or you maybe missed something, or you want to share this presentation with someone who you think might be interested, watch for the adfed.org blog update, and please feel free to share it widely. Last and certainly not least, I want to talk, before I move into some AdFed stuff, I would just want to say thank you to everybody who donated today when you registered to attend the webinar. Those funds go directly to Hazelden Betty Ford and NAMI, depending on how you did that when you registered. And you still can donate to both of these organizations directly on their website, and we would encourage you to do so. The work that they do is really important, and we're happy to use this platform to help support them in their missions. So finally, thank you to all of our sponsors. First and foremost, I want to say a special thank you to Mike and Mcvoy. As Mike, I think somebody mentioned in the beginning, this really was a brainchild of Mike's, and he brought it forward and connected with AdFed on it, and we really appreciate that. It was the spark that started a great conversation that turned into something bigger, I think, than any of us expected it to. And like Miles said, we really hope that this will be a conversation that we can continue well beyond just this one event tonight. So thank you for that. In addition, just a shout out quick to the AdFed annual sponsors. Without their support, we would not be able to put on events like this. So thank you to everybody for supporting AdFed and allowing us to have these important conversations. Last but not least, just a reminder of the hashtag OpenMinds. In the beginning, we invited you to join the conversation, and now we invite you to continue the conversation. So just because our event is ending at this moment doesn't mean that the conversation has to stop. So please feel free to continue this on social media, and we'd be happy to have that discourse with you moving forward. Thanks again to everybody, and I think that's a wrap on Open Minds. Thank you on behalf of AdFed.